Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the role of humility in human transformation. With me is Barbara Harris Whitfield, who is the author with her husband, co-author of The Power of Humility. She is also the author of another dozen books, including such titles as The Natural Soul and Spiritual Awakenings. She is a psychotherapist, a respirational therapist, and a near-death experience researcher and experiencer. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And to begin with, it's often noted when people get involved in transformation at the spiritual level that they're trying to bypass dealing with their real problems.
Right. And I saw that often. And I didn't know what it was at first. It took me quite a while. When I started in the research at the medical school, we didn't know any of this yet. We were so new to the whole idea of transformation. So we had a support group, and then I interviewed hundreds of people with my colleagues. And I started getting really uncomfortable sometimes with a sort of arrogance. And the arrogance was coming from, I've had a spiritual awakening, I know it all, I am healed, through all the things I was hearing. And it was like, wait a minute. From my own experience, it was, this is an initiation. I'm starting to wake up to my own traumas and my own problems, and I want to learn more. But there were these people that kept saying, oh no, this is it.
They're
we are
using
enlightened.
the spiritual language as a way of maintaining their problems and rather than overcoming them.
Correct. And I couldn't put my finger on it at first until I started teaching at Rutgers. I taught for 12 years on the Institute of Drug and Alcohol Studies.
Yes.
And after a while, my students were helping me. My classes were called When the 12th Step Happens First. There's no arrogance in that.
When the 12th step, meaning spiritual awakening,
happens first.
We're
clueless about those other 11 steps. I was lucky that I met Charlie and started looking at the recovery movement.
Your husband, Charles Whitfield.
Correct. And looking at all of these steps in order to have a spiritual awakening. So when it happens first, we're really clueless. And what finally happened, one of my students, this is when I realized it was spiritual bypass.
Now, a lot of our viewers may not be familiar with the 12 steps. So they're largely, maybe we could summarize, they are psychological processes for getting in touch with the ways in which you may have damaged yourself or damaged others, like taking a ruthless moral inventory of yourself.
Right, and in the 12 steps, you have the ability to have a sponsor, somebody safe that can help you. And when Bill W.,
the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous,
to me, the 12 steps are 216 words. That's it. But all of those 216 words have got to be divinely given to him, because it really is a path for healing. It's free. You find camaraderie with other people that have been through what you've been through, and slowly but surely you stop feeling the shame of whatever it is, and you start to feel that there really is hope. And it's not just for alcoholics or drug addicts. We just came from an ACOA conference, Adult Children of Alcoholics. They're damaged enough by living with an alcoholic in their childhood that the 12 steps can be adapted to help them get through it with no shame.
So really, these 12 steps are for anybody who wants to work through an emotional, psychological issue.
Correct. And if they want to, they can come to us. We do individual and group, or they can just do it on their own if they don't get stuck.
And I understand that Bill W., the anonymous founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, I understand he was in communication with the great Swiss psychotherapist Carl Jung.
Yes. Yes,
So
their story is remarkable.
There's a lot of depth behind all of this.
And Bill W. had a light experience. It might not have been near death, but he was in detox, and detox is another trigger for having these kinds of spiritual experiences. In fact, I've collected 14 or 15 different triggers: the loss of a loved one, hearing a spiritual talk, or reading spiritual literature. That's where I love A Course in Miracles. Childbirth. Helping somebody else die, just being with somebody as they're dying. There are many, many triggers. I mentioned before the trauma transcendence interface when you're in the middle of a huge trauma. So there's many different triggers, and some people get the whole idea of humility right away, and some people do what I'm calling a spiritual bypass. And when I was at Rutgers teaching, one of my students was the one that really brought it into focus for me. She was a counselor in a prison, and this one man who was there for child sexual abuse, he had incested his own daughters and some of his daughters' friends. He claimed to have had a spiritual awakening and was walking around with a Bible, and his minister came, brought his daughters, and insisted that they forgive him because he had had a spiritual awakening. This was so forced, and it was so arrogant on the minister and the father's part, that this student who was explaining the whole situation and I talked about that this was a spiritual bypass, that he did not go through the stages of recovery to then maybe ask them for an apology. But apologies don't come, and forgiveness doesn't come like that. It doesn't come from a head trip where somebody is insisting that you forgive. Real, true forgiveness is a release over years from your heart. It's your heart finally letting it go. So that was spiritual bypass. And then Charlie and I started talking about the lack of humility, that these people had none. And we define humility as the willingness and the openness to learn more about ourselves, others, and God.
That is a wonderful definition. It makes it very clear, because humility often gets confused with kind of an abjectness, a kind of slavish mentality,
Correct.
letting other people walk all over you.
Right.
That's not humility.
No. Humility is not quoting the Bible all the time or quoting some other spiritual literature, but opening up our ears and our heart to hear what other people are saying.
Realizing I need to learn.
Correct.
Rather than
Correct.
there's nothing I need to learn.
Yeah. So backtrack a little. You know, Charlie and I lived together, and then we get married. But we both came from first marriages that were very painful. So we both brought baggage with us.
And as I understand it, you also came from childhoods that were traumatic.
Right. So we both came with all of this, which makes it really hard to trust.
Baggage.
A lot of baggage. Hard to trust.
Yeah.
And then we have dear friends that had a spiritual community up in the mountains in California, and they were having difficulty in the spiritual community. And they got a hold of this map that is the one-page map that we base the entire book, The Power of Humility, on. This map takes you from conflict on the bottom to finally finding somebody else, and of course Charlie and I found each other, where we could co-commit to getting out of conflict.
Right.
And then above that is co-creation, where we invite God to come in and be with us in this struggle to get rid of our baggage and have humility. And then the top level is unity. And I thought that was just another reality, but the therapists we were teaching said, oh no, the unity level happens mainly in group therapy. And we started watching our own groups, and there's a moment, or there's 5 minutes, where it's so apparent, it's almost like having humidity that we can feel in the room, and this is unity. This is
unity with each other?
All of us, and a God source that has come in, where we can talk about the most painful, difficult subjects. And it's not painful, it's healing. So those are the 4 levels.
Well, those 4 levels seem to almost encompass both the depths and the heights of human experience.
Right.
And I gather from your work that the transition from one level to the next is, in order to achieve that transition, humility is the requirement.
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because the first year we worked on this book with this other couple,
Yeah.
she kept saying, what drives it? What moves us up? And,
Right.
you know, we don't know. And then one day Charlie just said, and this is from him studying the 12 steps, he said, it's the power of humility. And it just hit us all at once that that's what it is. And it's difficult at first. You know, here we were in our marriage doing one of these dances, which is still conflict.
Yes.
And when you choose humility, the coupleship changes to shoulder. We're facing the world now together and pledging to one another that we're not going to get into conflict anymore, that we're going to hear each other out. That's that first movement up. And the first third of the book was how to get from that first level to co-commitment. And it took us 5 years to write this book.
To go from conflict to co-commitment.
Yeah. It took us 5 years to write the book, and I would say it took us well over a year for the two of us personally to make that shift with each other, to move up to co-commitment.
Now, between you and your husband, you've written some 20 books.
Right.
So this was real work. Most of them come faster.
Right. Right. If we hadn't have written that book, we wouldn't have had the joy that we live with now, because joy comes from humility. You can see the beauty that's in us and all around us if we're willing to learn, if we're willing to have the willingness to open up to what life really is, not what we expect it to be, but what it really is. That's what humility is.
Well, and so what you're suggesting by spiritual bypass is a lot of people who might say, well, things are already perfect.
Yeah. It's so hard to be perfect. We're not perfect. God knows we're not perfect. And if we open up to the fact that we're not perfect, life becomes a lot easier. In the first chapter, we list 12 traits of humility. And then Charlie threw 2 more at me that I had never thought about besides gratitude. I think we added gratitude. And it was, don't know, and nobody's special. 2 Zen concepts.
Like a koan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it took me at least a month to realize that I don't know. And that's where the humility comes from. I don't know, I'm open to learning. And when you do that, your ego doesn't have to be spinning all the time that you know. The harder one for me was nobody special. I mean, Charlie had been studying Zen for years. It was an easy concept for him. What do you mean nobody special? I'm special. Over and over again, I kept doing this. I've worked my whole life to get rid of my pain and be special. Well, one day I tried it, and I could not believe how much easier it was to breathe and live. If I'm nobody special, if I can just be me, then I don't have to have a mask anymore. Then I don't have to prove to people that I know.
Well, it seems as if every spiritual gift, every little spiritual awakening that we have also comes with it this potential trap of getting ego involved, thinking this has something to do with my ego, and therefore I'm pretty special.
Right, I'm enlightened. You know, I've had an experience of God, so I'm enlightened now, and you listen to me because I know. What a trap. All the way through spiritual growth, there are traps. The trap of being psychic.
Which is, of course, in my field of parapsychology, a big one. I know many gifted psychics who, of course, they're human like everyone else. They have their struggles, and yet people often look up at them as somehow being better than human just because they can express a psychic gift.
And you know, for a while there, I was up on that. I call it the pedestal. I was up on the pedestal. I was a near-death experiencer. I was in Ken Ring's book, you know, all of that. But it's very lonely up there. There's nobody to have eye contact with. Who wants to live on a pedestal? It's so much easier to come back down here and be with everybody else, and we're all special. And at the same time, I realized that becoming psychic is a trap that we all go through, but in the Eastern philosophies, it's something you move through. If you stay with it, your spiritual growth doesn't continue. And my belief, because I've done psychic stuff, but my belief is we all are. It's where we learn to place our focus. So I can be psychic 1 minute, but then I don't have to stay being psychic. I can just be human again.
Being willing to learn.
Yes, willing to learn. Up until the last minute I'm here. And then when I move through to the next reality, I still want to learn. To me, life is just one big school, and we're all here to learn. And some of us are at a lower grade, and some of us are at a higher grade, and we're just helping each other move up those grades.
As I recall, one of the principles you work with is that the people who bug you the most, who get under your skin and bother you the most, are really your teachers.
They're our spiritual teachers.
It's odd because at the moment you're feeling bugged by them, it must seem as if they're just the opposite.
Absolutely, but there are a few people that still really bug me, I have to look at what is it about them that I don't like, and guess what? It's what I still haven't resolved within me. So they're just being a mirror to what I've rejected in myself.
So you've got these 4 stages. Let's go through them again. You start out with conflict, which is pretty much a bedrock for most humans. We all have some conflicts in our lives. They have to be worked through.
They have to be worked through, and what happens a lot of times, and we deal with this in the book, is we bring in a third person to diffuse the conflict. So this whole map started out with the Karpman Triangle, where a psychologist by the last name of Karpman followed police on domestic violence calls. And what he observed was when the police came in, within a couple of minutes, the victim was no longer the victim. They were now the victim.
The 2 people maybe in a domestic quarrel are turning against the policeman.
The policeman, and then the persecutor, which is usually the husband, turns around and tries to save the police from his wife. So what you're seeing are those 3 poles going around and around and around, and there's no resolution.
In other words, if I'm having a conflict with you, bringing in a third person to somehow resolve or settle the dispute or side with me is not a good idea.
No, if you look at it from an energetic standpoint, there's energy between us that's really jagged. And this third person comes in, and we're able to shift that energy over to him, and he's the one that's getting the jagged energy, but nothing's getting resolved. Nothing.
At an energetic level, the problem is still there, even though it might seem to have gone away. It's another form of bypass.
Right, exactly. If we pledge, if you and I said, okay, let's move up to co-commitment, let's move up to the next triangle, all of a sudden, if I was the victim, I become empowered because you're now here to help me work through the conflict. We can talk about it without any of that stagnant, horrible, jagged energy.
In other words, you and I are on the same side.
Correct.
The conflict becomes the third person, which is fine.
And the conflict becomes the learning experience. We learn at the second level. It's so much easier to live life like that. And then, after we get really comfortable with that, all we have to do is say a prayer. And Charlie likes to say that there's a prayer that's only one word that really works: help. Just ask God to come in and help. So at the third, and this works fantastically with my adult children.
Now, I want to stop you because you've used the word God. And I know that word is going to push people's buttons.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Let's talk about what you mean.
There is a divine energy that knows so much more than we do, that is so much more intelligent than anything I could ever do on my own, that when I say help, help happens in a way I could have never guessed. And I have to swallow my ego because it may be, I'll use my children as an example, and my kids are in their 40s and 50s. You know, we still got baggage from raising them before I had my NDE when I was
your near-death experience,
right,
a profound spiritual awakening that we've discussed in an earlier interview.
Correct. So my ego wants to jump in and teach them what I know. Well, that can't happen. What I have to do is be on their side and just say, help. And this energy comes in and resolves it. It may take an hour, it might take a week, it might take a month. I just have to believe it. And it's resolved in a way that is so peaceful and nothing I could have ever predicted. So that's what I mean by God. And when I teach A Course in Miracles, or when I'm just studying A Course in Miracles myself, it seems to me that brilliant energy that enveloped me in my own near-death experience, it's that same energy. It's so intelligent. Intelligent isn't enough of a word.
Now, some of our viewers probably don't know what is A Course in Miracles.
I had Jane Smith is her name. She's a near-death experiencer that I had met years ago. And she said to me, Barbara, have you read A Course in Miracles yet? And I said, no. What is it? And she said, it was written by the same energy we were with in our near-death experiences. Well, many of us who have had these experiences at the beginning, we don't want to read anybody else's. We know what we know, and we're so afraid that other writing is going to mess up. Okay, so it took me several years, and when Charlie and I were living together in the beginning, he said to me, you know, here's the book called A Course in Miracles. I said, no, I don't want to mess up my experience. Well, finally one night, I picked up, there were 3 books. I picked up the thin one, which is called The Teacher's Manual. I sat up and read, and I cried all night long. This author understood what I touched in my near-death experience. It was,
and this, we might just say, the book was channeled.
Yes.
I happen to have met, and you probably have too, the Helen Schuckman.
No, I wish I could have.
Yes, I met her and Bill Thetford, who are the 2 Columbia University psychologists who channeled this material. They were working at Columbia University, and it became kind of a rat race. I think Columbia Teachers College, and one day, Helen, who was an atheist, said to her colleague, Bill Thetford, there's got to be another way. We don't have to keep doing this. And after she said that to her colleague, like co-commitment or co-creation, and asking for another way, asking for help, all of a sudden, out of the blue, came this voice saying, take dictation. And before long, these books came through perfectly transcribed.
Yes, yes. And for me, after that reading, we decided we would read a lesson every morning. That would be a touchstone before we both left for work. So every morning we would go out on our porch and we would read a page, one lesson. And it was interesting because we had hung over the front door, it was a stained glass window from a church, and it was the white dove, the Holy Spirit. And so every morning we would go through under the Holy Spirit, and we would read a page. Well, one day I came home and I thought, you know, that page really made sense. For the first time I got it, because it's hard to understand the Course when you start reading it. And I went back out on the porch to pick up the book. I had it in my hands. And as I looked at it, I said, this book contains the Holy Spirit. And at that second, a white dove smashed into the window. And I swear we had eye contact. This white dove and I looked at each other, and it kind of brushed itself off and took off. And I started calling Charlie because I just couldn't believe it. And he came out and he saw immediately the outline of the dove in like a white powder, and he took pictures of it. That was my first real encounter with the Course, where I realized this is the Holy Spirit, or even being Jewish, I can admit that this could have been written by Jesus. Jesus claims he wrote that book. Why not? He's still around. You know, and this is a modern holy book that Charlie and I wound up teaching.
And I suppose the point that we started out with about humility, the power of humility. I mean, it's wonderful you found the Course in Miracles. It's a great source. It's a great resource.
Well,
but if you're in this mode of willing to learn, I'm willing to grow, and I'm asking for help, it could come from anywhere.
it could, but what I love about A Course in Miracles is it's really attacking, or maybe attacking is the wrong word, it's addressing our ego. It is the most sophisticated book I've ever seen on how to handle the ego so it becomes our servant instead of our master. So that's what I love about it. And we cycled through it at least 3 times before we started teaching it. And teaching it was a joy. So the book really, really helped our relationship too.
And I guess you feel that there are miracles in your life.
Oh, all the time.
Or maybe to put it even more appropriately, life itself is a miracle.
Yes. It's a miracle that I came through what I came through and can be who I am now.
You have come through so much
Yes,
from everything
yes,
I know about
yes.
your story.
Right. So, I think enlightenment, the word enlightened is a moment. There are many, many moments that I've had that were enlightening. But to choose to call ourselves enlightened is just another ego level that we have to overcome and move through. And it doesn't have to be the Course. It can be any book, like you said, that helps us address that ego so we can just be who we are and enjoy life. That's a miracle.
And it needn't even be a book asking for help.
Right.
It might come...
Well, it can be somebody we can't stand is teaching us.
Or, as you point out, a dove.
The dove. And we still have the pictures. So it really did happen.
It's as if the whole universe is alive.
And the whole universe is here to support us in our growth.
Well, that is a very profound understanding, and one that you're able to state so simply and with humility. Barbara Harris Whitfield, thank you so much for sharing with me.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.